I'm Callie Morgan. At 28, I thought coming home to Seattle to plan my wedding would be healing after years of silence and betrayal. Instead, my sister stole my venue, kissed my fiancé, and painted me the villain. Then at her wedding, the FBI showed up because I uncovered her fiancé's fraud. When my parents told me, "You've ruined everything," I realized I wasn't the problem. I just stopped playing along. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit like and subscribe. Because this story, it could be yours too. I grew up in a house that looked like something out of a Better Homes and Gardens catalog. Cedar shingles, a wraparound porch, and a tall maple tree that turned blood red every October. From the outside, our home was the embodiment of calm Pacific Northwest elegance. But inside, it wasn't calm. It was calibrated. Every room, every conversation, every look rotated around one person, Callie Morgan. My sister was 4 years older than me and had been handed the sun from the moment she was born. Callie was the kind of girl people noticed before they saw anyone else. She had the kind of prettiness that didn't need makeup, just windblown hair, a shrug, and the ability to cry on cue. What made her dangerous wasn't her charm. It was how she knew when to use it and who to use it on. My parents always said she was sensitive, like it was a condition we all had to accommodate. And I did. I accommodated for 20 years. Our father, Douglas Morgan, was a well-known architect in the Seattle area. Stoic, measured, the kind of man who wore crisp chambray shirts even on Sundays. He approached parenting like drafting a blueprint. Everything had to have function, structure, and form. Unfortunately, that meant the emotional mess of raising 2 girls often fell to our mother, Sylvia, a pharmacist who smiled like she was tired and parented like she was apologizing for something. And in that soft, tired gaze, Callie was a fragile masterpiece that needed preserving. I was the shelf she was placed on. From as far back as I can remember, Callie took what was mine, sometimes with a smile, sometimes without asking. When I was 6 and got a watercolor set for Christmas, she traded hers with me because mine had better pigment. When I was 12 and won second place in a statewide poetry contest, Callie borrowed the poem, changed the title, and won a similar award a month later. I remember reading the program, seeing my own metaphors on the page under her name, and feeling nothing but cold. She didn't even try to deny it. "You're better at writing," she said. Like that somehow made it okay. And when I looked to my parents for help, their response was always the same. "She didn't mean harm, Callie. You know she's more sensitive than you. You'll understand when you're older. You're the logical one." They dressed it up like a compliment, but what they meant was, "You're the one we expect not to break." I started to internalize it. Maybe that's why I let her take the best parts of my teenage years. Maybe that's why I didn't fight harder until she did something that crossed a line no sister should ever cross. Something that finally broke the blueprint. It was senior year of high school. I had spent 2 years building my place in the jazz ensemble, a group that, at our school, was taken almost absurdly seriously. I wasn't the showiest voice, but I had control, tone, presence. I'd earned the solo spot for our spring competition, something I'd practiced for every weekend since September. The night before our regional performance, I was pulled into the principal's office. There had been an anonymous complaint sent from my school login, accusing our conductor, Mr. Choi, of inappropriate conduct and favoritism. The email was sent at midnight. The IP address matched my home Wi-Fi. I tried to speak, tried to explain. But Principal Caro looked at me with a strange blend of disappointment and relief, like punishing the quiet one made things easier. I expected better, Callie. I was suspended from the ensemble. My solo was reassigned. My reputation tarnished, just enough to sting. For weeks, I sat in classes watching whispers spread. It wasn't until Aaron's then-boyfriend, Mark, showed up crying outside my homeroom that I learned the truth. He had helped her compose the fake email. She thought it was a prank and was jealous of how I always got attention for being so perfect. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it, didn't apologize. "I didn't think they'd believe it," she said, shrugging. "Besides, you're always the one who lands on your feet." That was the last straw. I applied to Columbia's law program the next day. Didn't tell anyone until the acceptance letter arrived. While my parents were still reeling from the truth about Aaron, I packed my things and left before graduation. Aaron got to walk across the stage with applause. I left quietly, No photos, no family dinner, just me, a cab, and a one-way flight to New York. It's funny how people think leaving fixes things. It doesn't. It just gives your pain new furniture. I built a life in Manhattan, clean, structured, disciplined. Became the kind of woman no one could take lightly. But even then, in the moments between meetings or during a late subway ride, my mind drifted back to that house, that porch, that family who never really saw me. The worst kind of loneliness is the kind that follows you from your childhood bedroom. And for the longest time, I promised myself one thing. I would never go back. But promises change, especially when death walks through the front door. They say grief has a way of calling you home. But for me, it wasn't grief that brought me back to Seattle. It was obligation dressed in mourning black. My grandmother had passed 3 weeks earlier, and despite the silence between us, I still remembered her warm hands and the smell of chamomile tea on her breath. She was the only person in our family who ever asked me how I felt without trying to correct the answer. So when I suggested to Dean that we hold our wedding closer to home, near the lake house she loved, it didn't feel like giving in. It felt like closure. Dean agreed instantly. That's who he is. Stable, grounded. He served in the Army Medical Corps for nearly a decade, and now runs trauma response at Harborview. Where I carry tension in my voice, he carries it in silence. I trust him like I trust myself. And in my world, that's rare. We'd met during a pro bono case 2 years ago. Him volunteering, me defending a battered mother, and somehow we never unlatched. A man like that makes you believe home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person. Still, as our plane touched down at SeaTac, I felt the air thicken. Something inside me tightened with every pine tree we passed on the drive back. You can leave a house behind. You can't outrun what was built inside it. We pulled into my parents' driveway, late on a gray Friday afternoon. Their home looked exactly the same. Clean lawn, polished porch swing, wind chimes barely whispering. Aaron's SUV was already there, parked too close to the mailbox like always, like rules were suggestions. I took a breath, smoothed my blazer, and rang the doorbell to my own childhood. My mother answered first. "Callie," she said, smiling like it was muscle memory. "You look thin." "Good to see you too, Mom," I replied. Then came the hug, half-hearted, a pat on the back, and a citrus-scented echo of warmth. My father stood at the kitchen entrance, nodding like we were business associates. Erin, of course, made her entrance like she owned the floor. She walked in barefoot, holding a glass of rosé, a soft cream sweater hanging off one shoulder like she'd just stepped out of a lifestyle ad. "Well, well," she said. "Look who came back from her tower." "Nice to see you, Erin," I said. My voice didn't match hers. Mine carried restraint. Hers carried performance. She turned to Dean and flashed her signature grin. "And this must be the mysterious fiancé. I was starting to think Callie invented you to avoid the spotlight." Dean extended a polite hand. "Pleasure to meet you. Sorry for your loss." Erin didn't flinch. "Thanks. Grandma was persistent." It was the kind of comment only Erin could make, passive enough to slide by unnoticed, sharp enough to cut under the skin. Dinner that night was a masterclass in surface-level civility. My parents asked about wedding plans, but only after asking Erin for updates on her engagement. Apparently, she and Calvin Holt were planning a stunning, elegant winter-to-spring crossover ceremony that would be 1 part art installation, 1 part real estate gala. I watched as my mother practically beamed. "He's so connected," she gushed, "and charming. They're thinking Pine Grove Hall." My fork stopped midair. I blinked. "Excuse me," I said. Erin sipped her wine. "Pine Grove. You know, the old vineyard-turned-venue in Woodinville? Calvin loves the architecture. He locked in June 8th. It's the perfect Saturday. And surprise, they had an opening." "I know," I said, voice low. "I booked that venue, last month, for September." There was a beat. Then she gave a little shrug. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still considering it. I just knew you mentioned it before, and Calvin moves fast. I mean, with the global investor list he's working on. We couldn't wait for fall." My mother stepped in, voice too sweet. "Callie, I'm sure there's another beautiful option. Pine Grove isn't the only vineyard in the state." I turned to my father. "You knew she took the venue?" He cleared his throat, avoided my eyes. We assumed it was a misunderstanding. Aaron said you hadn't confirmed. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from the clarity of something I'd known all along. This family would always find a way to rewrite the facts in favor of Aaron. Dean put a hand on my thigh under the table, a small gesture that said, "I see you. You're not crazy." "Let me guess," I said slowly. "You didn't ask. You just assumed." Aaron leaned in, all smiles and frost. "We're family, Callie. I figured you'd be happy for me. You always said you hated big weddings anyway." That wasn't what I said. What I said was I wanted something intentional, something meaningful, something ours. Pine Grove was the one venue that had felt like both my vision and Dean's. Rustic wood beams, rolling vines, a hall that didn't scream wealth but whispered legacy. And she took it without blinking. That night, as Dean and I drove back to our rental house near Green Lake, I stared out the window and tried to unclench my jaw. "She didn't even flinch," I said. "She knew what she was doing," Dean replied, calm but pointed. "You think she just guessed the same venue and date window?" "No, she'd known. Aaron always knew what I wanted, because she made a habit of watching, waiting, and striking when the prize was within reach. Not to enjoy it herself, but to make sure I couldn't have it." As we pulled up to the cottage, Dean parked and looked over. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, which was code for, "I'm preparing for a war I didn't start. But I sure as hell will finish." And just like that, I knew this trip home would be more than a wedding. It would be a reckoning. A wedding venue isn't just a location. It's the physical manifestation of a promise. It's where I do meets forever. And for me, Pine Grove Hall had become that place. The moment Dean and I walked through the arching vineyard and into the wide-beamed ballroom, I knew. It wasn't grand in the traditional sense. No chandeliers, no fake marble. It was timeless, wood, stone, and quiet light, like a vow carved in earth, which is why 3 days after our awkward family dinner, when I opened an email from the venue's coordinator titled "Final Confirmation for June 8th Transfer," I thought it was a mistake. I had reserved September 14th, paid the deposit, signed every document myself, yet the email laid it out in black and white. The date had been changed. The reservation now listed under Aaron Morgan plus Calvin Holt. I stared at the screen long enough for my coffee to go cold. Then I picked up the phone. "Hi, this is Callie Morgan. I just received an email from you, something about a transfer." "Oh yes," the coordinator chirped. "Aaron sent us the updated paperwork last week. Same contract, just updated for the couple and date. She mentioned you'd be busy with work and she was handling things for you. I thought it was sweet of her." "Sweet." "She forged my authorization code," I said, my voice flat. "That code was tied to my deposit, $22,000 from my account. I never approved this." A pause. Then a quieter voice. "I'm sorry." Everything looked legitimate. The email came from your address. It even had your signature on the PDF. It took me 30 minutes to stop shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at the edge of our rented bed, scrolling through the email thread she'd faked, my own digital signature staring back at me like a cruel joke. Dean found me there and read through the documents without saying a word. Then he looked up, jaw tight. This wasn't a misstep. This was calculated. "It's not the venue," I whispered. "It's the way she knew exactly how to get to me." We didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to look Aaron in the eye first. And I didn't want denials. I wanted facts. So I opened my old Gmail account, the one I hadn't used since law school. The one I'd foolishly left synced on the hand-me-down laptop I gave my mom last year. Aaron must have guessed the password. Or maybe she didn't have to guess at all. It was still the name of our childhood dog, Milo 42. Buried deep in the sent folder was a series of forwarded contracts. She had sent them to the venue, changing small details like a seasoned fraudster. My name to hers, the date shifted. The email domain swapped with a backup I hadn't touched in years. She even copied my tone in the emails. Efficient, neutral, professional. I printed it all. The next evening, my parents invited us over for wedding wine night, as my mother called it, her way of softening what she knew would be another Aaron-centric celebration. Dean and I arrived just as Aaron was showing off a sample of her invitation suite, ivory cardstock with gold embossing, an illustration of Pine Grove's arched entry across the top. I let her finish the pitch before I dropped the first strike. "You stole my venue," I said calmly. She blinked once. "Excuse me." "You hacked my email, forged my signature, and rerouted my $22,000 deposit." I spoke to the venue. "I've seen the paperwork." For a flicker of a moment, her mask slipped. Just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, like she was deciding whether to play victim or smug. Then she chose both. "I thought you'd be more flexible. Calvin's European investors are only in town that weekend. We couldn't pass up the visibility. Besides, you can rebook for fall. September's not even that popular." My mother interjected with a soft plea. "Girls, please, let's not turn this into a fight. Callie, you've always said you prefer small ceremonies. Why not do something more intimate?" I turned to my father. "And you're okay with this?" He didn't meet my eyes. "We assumed you two worked it out privately." "She committed fraud," I said flatly. "And your response is, maybe do something smaller?" Erin sighed, swirling her wine like the world exhausted her. "Look, I'll pay you back, eventually. Calvin just needs to move some assets around first." Dean laughed, not a real laugh, more a bark of disbelief. "You stole her wedding venue, and now you're offering to reimburse the damage after your fiancé finishes moving shady money?" Erin's eyes narrowed. "No one asked you to get involved, Dean. This is between sisters." "No," I said, standing. "This is between a woman and the one person who's made a lifetime of taking from her and calling it love." The room went silent. Then my mother, with a tired shake of her head, said the thing that shattered whatever illusion remained. "Callie, you're a lawyer. You can afford a different venue. Erin's finally found something stable. Let her have this." It wasn't a request. It was a command dressed in guilt. I looked at them, my parents, still orbiting Erin's chaos like satellites programmed to obey, and I realized something sharp and cold. They weren't going to protect me from her. They never had. So I would. And I wouldn't need their permission. There's something uniquely brutal about betrayal when it comes in slow motion. It doesn't strike, it simmers. And Erin wasn't done. Taking my wedding venue wasn't enough. What came next wasn't just calculated, it was personal. Dean told me the morning after the wine night. We were sitting on the porch of our rental house, coffee cups in hand, neither of us speaking until he finally exhaled, like the words had been trapped behind his teeth. "I should probably tell you something," he said. "Eyes on the trees instead of me. That never means anything good." She tried to kiss me. Erin. My stomach didn't drop. It locked. He explained it happened at a family BBQ 2 weeks ago, one I couldn't attend because I had court prep. Erin had cornered him near the kitchen after a few too many glasses of sangria. She'd complimented his discipline, said something about how he must be exhausted keeping up with someone so serious all the time. And before he could step back, she leaned in. He turned away. She laughed. "Just testing," she said, like her mouth on another woman's fiancé was a game. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because I didn't want to escalate the situation," he said. "I thought it was her being drunk, desperate for attention. But now? After everything she's done, this feels targeted." He was right, and the fact that Erin had chosen him, of all people, was no coincidence. This wasn't attraction. It was strategy. It was power. If she couldn't steal my future, she'd try to unravel it from the inside. That evening, I checked my Instagram DMs out of instinct. 2 unread messages from old classmates. Both said the same thing in different tones. "Heard a weird rumor about Dean. Thought you should know Erin's been saying stuff. Stuff like he wasn't over his ex. That he was feeling pressure. That he and I were rushing things because of optics." None of it was true, but truth had never been her weapon, only suggestion. The next day, my mom called. "Sweetheart, Erin mentioned you and Dean have been under some stress. I just wanted to check in. You know, sometimes it's okay to step back from a wedding if it's not the right time." I held the phone to my ear in silence. "I'm fine, Mom," I finally said. "We're fine." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" Erin said she saw Dean having lunch with a woman, someone from his hospital. I almost laughed. It wasn't humor, it was disbelief at how fast my own mother swallowed the bait. "You mean the trauma nurse he works with?" I said. "The one you met at Grandma's memorial." "Oh," she said. "Right?" Erin didn't have details. Of course not. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Aaron, documentation. The first file was a transcription of Dean's account. The second, screenshots of messages from people warning me. The third, a copy of her latest Instagram story, a photo of her engagement ring with a caption that read, "Some of us don't need to compete. We already won." I started recording conversations after that. Not just because I was angry, but because I was preparing. Erin wasn't just playing dirty, she was playing dangerous. The line between emotional sabotage and legal manipulation is thinner than most people realize, and I wasn't going to let her step over it without a record. At a brunch the following weekend, I watched her carefully. She floated from guest to guest in a peach wrap dress, smiling like Betrayal was a brand she wore well. When she finally made her way to Dean and me, she leaned in close, all syrup and teeth. "Glad to see you two holding it together," she said. "That's rare these days." Dean didn't blink. I held my glass with a stillness that came from courtroom training. She continued softly enough for only us to hear. "Just don't get too comfortable. People have a way of changing their minds when the pressure builds." I turned to her, cool and even. "You keep talking like you're in a game, Aaron, but you're not the one with the rules anymore." Something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, just recognition. Like for the first time, she realized I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. I wasn't the fallback. I was documenting her, and she didn't know what I knew, yet. As we walked back to the car, Dean asked, "Do you think she's just trying to push you into a meltdown?" "No," I said. "She wants to watch me lose something. Not because she wants it, because she wants to make sure I don't have it." He nodded, and we didn't speak for the rest of the drive. But I knew one thing with clarity. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This was psychological warfare. And Aaron had no idea the depth of the case I was building, not in court, but in truth. Because when blood turns on love, sometimes the only response left is evidence. The thing about being a lawyer is, you stop believing in coincidence pretty early on. Coincidence is lazy. Patterns, on the other hand, are evidence waiting for definition. And after what Aaron did with my venue, with my name, with my fiancé's dignity, I started seeing patterns everywhere, especially in her fiancé, Calvin Holt. I knew almost nothing about him when I arrived back in Seattle. Tall, charming, the kind of smile that looked rehearsed in a mirror, maybe even trademarked. Aaron said he was an investor, real estate, mostly luxury development. He dropped names of big projects in New York and Toronto like confetti. I didn't trust it. It wasn't just intuition, it was structure. His answers were polished but hollow, like a resume built for strangers who wouldn't bother checking. So I did what I was trained to do. I checked. It started with a late-night search through LexisNexis and public court filings. There it was, a name, Tyler Hammond. Same birth date, same face, different state. In Arizona, Tyler Hammond had been the subject of a civil lawsuit involving real estate fraud, targeting retirees with fake development bonds. The case never made it to trial. He disappeared midway through discovery. Next came Texas. Same pattern, same name, same face. But the name wasn't Calvin Holt. It wasn't even Tyler Hammond this time. It was Nathaniel Coulter. Another alias, another failed project, another vanishing act before subpoenas could stick. The more I dug, the more sick I felt. This wasn't just a man with a shady past. This was a man with a system. I kept my findings in a private folder labeled Unconfirmed. Dean reviewed everything with me, line by line. "If this is what it looks like," he said, "your sister's fiancé is running a multi-state con." "No," I corrected him, "he's running her. And maybe she's helping." 2 days later, Aaron hosted a brunch at their penthouse downtown. Dean and I attended out of strategy, not sentiment. The place was pristine. Italian marble, wall-to-wall windows, imported Scandinavian furniture. Aaron floated around in silk, smiling like none of it was borrowed time. As I stepped out onto the balcony to get air, I noticed the office door cracked open behind me. Calvin was inside, speaking low into his phone. I stayed silent, hidden by the curtains. He was laughing. "The Morgan deal is almost locked. Her dad's reviewing the term sheet this week. He's cautious, but once he sees who else is in, he'll bite." And with his contacts in the county development board, yeah, that opens the floodgates. My blood froze. Morgan. He meant my father. I stayed absolutely still. Another voice responded. Aaron's. Let's just make sure we push this before the wedding. Once the ceremony's over, nobody will be asking real questions for at least a few months. Calvin chuckled. Exactly. We'll be in the Caymans before anyone notices the books don't match. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. I simply stepped backward and walked straight out the front door. Later that night, I submitted an anonymous tip to the Washington State Securities Division. Then a second report to the SEC whistleblower program. I included everything I'd found. Aliases, property maps, offshore shell structures, and screenshots of Aaron and Calvin's investment flyers promising 20% annual returns, secured by international holdings. Promises no real firm would ever make in writing unless they were lying. Dean looked at me as I hit send. You sure you want to go this far? This isn't personal anymore, I said. This is criminal. Still, it was personal. Because if my father signed those investment papers, Erin wouldn't just be implicated, she'd be in it. Not some helpless fiancé duped by a charming fraud. No. She'd be accessory, recruiter, and beneficiary. I knew I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not without tipping the investigation. But I had one last move to make. I logged into an old friend's private international real estate database, an access code I kept from a past case. I searched every property Calvin had claimed he owned. Serbia, Belize, coastal Spain. None of them existed. Not legally, not commercially. Some didn't even have parcel registrations. He was selling phantoms. My hands trembled only once. When I opened a document I found in my father's inbox during a routine printer sync. An investment pledge form, signed. Not just his name, my mother's too. $200,000. The ink was still fresh. I stared at it in silence, then quietly made a copy and backed it up in triplicate. One to the investigator, one to my lawyer friend in D.C., and one I kept in my safe. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was a collapse waiting to happen, and I had become the only one with the rope strong enough to stop it. Or let it burn. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for consequence. And Pine Grove Hall, our once sacred ground, was about to become the courtroom she never saw coming. When Erin asked me to be her bridesmaid, she framed it like a peace offering. It would mean the world to have you by my side, she said. Eyes glossy, voice syrup thick. My mother clasped her hands like it was a fairy tale. So healing to see you two together again. I said yes, not out of forgiveness, but surveillance. Because standing beside her meant I'd have a front row seat to the unraveling. The morning of the wedding was overcast, mist curling around the vineyard like a veil. Inside Pine Grove's bridal suite, Erin floated from mirror to mirror, adjusting her curls, critiquing the centerpieces, dictating napkin folds like a general on the edge of war. Calvin was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Peace. She handed me her phone at one point and said, "Can you just double-check the vows file? I think I accidentally deleted Calvin's final version." I didn't flinch. I just smiled and tapped the screen, recording everything. Guests began arriving by noon. Real estate developers, city officials, influencers with skin like lacquered wood. Dean sat quietly near the aisle, jaw set. My parents worked the room like proud sponsors. Champagne flowed, flashbulbs flickered. No one knew that in less than an hour, this whole curated fantasy would implode. At exactly 2:59 p.m., we lined up behind the heavy oak doors of the main hall. Erin adjusted her veil with trembling fingers. "God, I hope the rain holds," she muttered. "Nothing ruins photos like frizz." I bit my tongue. Let the sky do what it must. The doors opened. Music swelled. We walked. The ceremony unfolded like a play. Vows rehearsed, smiles polished, the officiant reciting lines he barely believed. I stood still, heart pounding, not from nerves, but timing. Because I knew what was coming. I had delivered the files 2 days earlier through encrypted channels under an alias. I knew the name of the FBI agent. I knew where they'd enter. I knew what line they were waiting for. If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Then movement. 2 suited agents from the back, followed by 3 more near the aisle, calm, swift, surgical. "Calvin Holt," one of them said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering across state and federal jurisdictions." Gasps spread like fire. Calvin froze. Erin turned, horror blooming across her face like blood seeping through silk. "What is this?" she whispered. "You can't be serious," Calvin barked, but the cuffs said otherwise. Erin reached for him. No, this isn't. There's been a mistake." The agent glanced at her. "We'll have questions for you too, ma'am. Later." As they led Calvin out, a low wail broke from Erin's throat. Not grief, not fear, rage, directed straight at me. "You knew," she spat. "You knew, and you still stood there smiling." I didn't smile, not once. I just looked at her the way a prosecutor looks at a guilty defendant. Steady, certain, and ready. "Yes," I said. "I knew." Guests began scattering, murmuring, pulling out phones. My parents looked shell-shocked. My mother held her mouth like she might vomit. My father sat down slowly, as if the weight of truth had finally registered in his spine. Erin turned to me again, mascara streaking. "You did this. You ruined my life." "No," I said, stepping forward. "I stopped you from ruining his, and theirs, and ours." She shook her head violently, veil slipping off one side. "You've always wanted to take what was mine." "Funny," I said. "That's what I've been saying for 20 years. Silence swallowed us. Eventually, someone turned off the music. The officiant disappeared. A bottle of champagne shattered near the dessert table. Accidental or metaphorical, I'd never know. Dean came to stand beside me, hand brushing mine, grounding me in the chaos. We left quietly, no triumphant exit, no speech, just the sound of truth finally detonating in a room full of curated delusion. As we drove away, Dean asked, "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm clean." Because justice doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it crashes a wedding in heels and a neutral-toned dress. Sometimes the best vows are the ones you make to yourself, like, "I will not stay silent. I will not let blood erase the damage it causes. And I will burn down the fantasy to save the future, even if it means watching everything fall apart." On her perfect day. The silence after the arrest echoed louder than the handcuffs. We didn't speak in the car, not on the drive back to Green Lake, not while we washed off the scent of champagne and panic. But I could feel it, the tension shifting. Not between Dean and me, but around me, like tectonic plates, finally cracking beneath the surface of a family built on denial. By morning, the text began. My mother first. "Callie, we need to talk. Please come over." Then my father. "Your mother is upset. I think it's best we clear the air." Neither asked how I was. We arrived at noon. Erin was already there, sitting on the living room couch like a collapsed centerpiece, makeup smeared, eyes vacant. My mother hovered near the kitchen, hands trembling over a cold teapot. My father stood behind his armchair like he needed something to brace against. "You could have warned us," my mother said. "No hello, no breath between blame." "I did," I replied, "just not in the way you would have believed. You humiliated her in front of everyone. You ruined her future." "No," I said, voice steady. "She did that herself. I just stopped the bleeding before it reached your retirement fund." Erin snapped up. "You think you're better than me? Because you went to New York and played lawyer while I stayed here and built something?" "Built?" I scoffed. "You forged, manipulated, and stole. From me, from Dad, from anyone who didn't read the fine print." My mother stepped forward, voice cracking. "You didn't have to do it that way, in front of guests. FBI? That was cruel." "Cruel," I repeated, stunned. "You mean like hacking my email, or kissing my fiancé, or spreading rumors about me being unstable? That kind of cruelty?" My father spoke for the first time. "Callie, enough." I turned to him. "No, we're not doing this again. We're not letting her cry her way out while I carry the weight." He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in my life, he didn't rush to defend her. He didn't speak at all. That silence was its own verdict. Then the doorbell rang. A woman in her 50s stood outside, red coat, pearl earrings, and the kind of face you recognize from community boards or PTA fundraisers. She looked past me and addressed my mother. "Sylvia," she said gently, "I'm sorry to come like this, But I think you should know. Aaron approached me and Ben about a real estate deal. Said it was an exclusive offer through Calvin. Promised double returns in 12 months. My mother blinked. What? We wired $50,000. 2 months ago, she said the window would close in 48 hours. That it was a family opportunity. The woman handed my mother a folder. Printed screenshots, transfer slips, handwritten notes in Aaron's cursive. I stepped back. The air was gone from the room. My mother sat down without a word. My father ran a hand down his face like trying to wake from a bad dream. Aaron didn't speak. I turned to her, slow and deliberate. How many people, Aaron? How many did you use Dad's name to bait into your mess? She stared at me, dead behind the eyes. They trusted me. That's not illegal. No, I said. But fraud is. There was nothing left to say. No defense, no deflection. I stood there in the wreckage of what used to be family and realized the truth. Erin didn't just manipulate people, she built her entire life out of it. And the moment it collapsed, so did her ability to pretend. Dean touched my arm. We should go. As we walked out, I heard my father exhale deeply. Not like a man grieving, but like one finally done holding up a roof that was never stable. At home, I stared at my phone, at the text from my mom still sitting unanswered. She's not perfect, but she's still your sister. Not anymore. Because blood might excuse a mistake, but it doesn't excuse a pattern. And Aaron's pattern had finally been exposed. One stolen lie at a time. A week after the wedding that wasn't mine unraveled like a legal brief soaked in gasoline, I got a text from Grandma Lucille. It simply read, "Coffee, just you, just me, don't bring armor." She was my father's mother, sharp-witted, unfiltered, and probably the only person in our family who saw Aaron without the rose-tinted lenses. I arrived at the little cafe near Volunteer Park on a gray Tuesday morning, expecting polite small talk. What I got was something closer to testimony. She didn't waste time. "You think your parents don't love you, don't you?" I didn't answer. I stirred my coffee with mechanical grace, watching the spoon swirl like I could dissolve the question. "I'm not defending them," she said. "I'm just here to give you context. That's all truth ever really is. Context." She sat back. "Sylvia had 2 miscarriages before Aaron, then almost died giving birth to her. Your father, he broke in a way I'd never seen. When the doctors said she might not carry again, they turned Aaron into their miracle. You came after the storm, and they were still stuck in survival mode." I looked up. "So I was the spare tire?" "No," she said. "You were the insurance policy. If Aaron didn't make it, emotionally, physically, they needed someone strong. And you were strong, from day one." It should have made me angry, but it didn't. Not in the way people expect. It made things clearer, like turning on headlights in fog. You still can't see far, but at least you know what you're moving through. "Do they know that's how they treated me?" I asked. Lucille didn't blink. "They know parts, but denial is easier to parent than remorse." I nodded, taking in the quiet buzz of the cafe, the clink of plates, the low murmur of strangers living simpler stories. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this now?" She exhaled. "Because the story was never about the venue, or the fiancé, or the damn dress. It was about who got to be seen. And you've been invisible long enough." There was no apology in her voice, just fact. And sometimes, fact is kinder than sentiment. Before we left, she reached into her coat pocket and slid something across the table. A photograph. Faded. Creased. My grandmother holding a newborn me, Aaron sulking in the background. They thought they'd never get to hold another baby. But I knew then, you weren't their backup. You were their reckoning. I left with that photo in my coat and a strange new calm in my chest. Not forgiveness, not closure. Just clarity. And clarity, when wielded right, is stronger than vengeance. When I got home, Dean was waiting by the kitchen island. He looked up from his laptop and studied my face. "Good talk?" I nodded. "Truthful." He didn't push, just opened the cabinet and handed me a mug. I poured coffee, stood there for a moment, then said, "I used to think they didn't love me, but I don't think that's it." Dean raised an eyebrow. "I think they loved me conditionally. Aaron got empathy, I got expectation." "That's a hell of a thing to carry," he said. I know, I replied. But at least I'm done carrying it for them. Later that night, I found myself rereading the letter Erin wrote from jail. She hadn't apologized, but she had admitted something she never had before. I always thought I had to be more than you, even if it meant taking what wasn't mine. Because I knew, deep down, you'd always land on your feet. I just didn't want you to land before I did. It was as close to honesty as she'd ever come, and it didn't undo what she did. But it explained who she had become. I didn't cry reading it. I didn't write back. I folded it in half and placed it next to the photo from Grandma Lucille. 2 pieces of history, 1 truth. I wasn't the fragile one. I was the one they assumed could survive the fragility of others. They were right, and now I'd finally stopped mistaking survival for silence. They sentenced her to 2 years. Plea deal? First offense, cooperation clause. The judge called it leniency tied to personal misjudgment. I called it math, just enough time for her world to unravel, but not long enough for her to disappear. I didn't attend the hearing. I'd already seen enough theater to last a lifetime, but Dean did. He said Erin didn't cry, just stared forward like she couldn't decide whether to feel betrayed or bored. She wore a gray suit, too big for her shoulders, he told me, like she thought dressing down would make her look more remorseful. It didn't. Nothing could. My parents stopped mentioning her after the plea. No late-night calls, no sideways requests to send her books or letters. Just silence, the same kind they offered me when I left for New York. Except this time, it wasn't cold. It was stunned, as if they were still waiting for someone to come in and say it was all a misunderstanding. But no one did. The $22,000 was wired back into my account 6 weeks later. The bank flagged the funds during the FBI asset freeze, and after a few legal pushbacks, the system did what it was supposed to do. Dean handed me the bank statement like it was something sacred. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It feels like a refund on something that cost more than money." He nodded. "Let's spend it on something that matters." We did. Our wedding wasn't grand. We drove down to a beach in Oregon, just the 2 of us, a justice of the peace, and 6 chairs for the only people who stayed. Lucille was there. So was Dean's brother and my old roommate from law school. No chandeliers, no gold leaf menus, no floral arches. Just wind, water, and a vow that didn't need decoration. The rings we wore weren't expensive, but they fit. Like we were circling something solid, something earned. That night, I stood barefoot in the sand and watched the ocean swallow the sun. Dean poured 2 glasses of cheap champagne and handed me one. "To closure?" he asked. I shook my head. "To choice," I said. And we clinked glasses under a sky too quiet to question. A month after the wedding, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in tight cursive I knew too well. I opened it slowly, expecting drama. Instead, I got this. "I used to think I had to win something to matter, that if people looked at you and then at me, I had to come out brighter or louder or bigger just to exist. I know now that I was wrong. Maybe not in how I felt, but in how I acted. You didn't deserve what I did. I won't say I'm sorry. I don't think I've earned that word yet. But I will say this. I never hated you. I just hated that I couldn't be you. And that's the ugliest truth I have to live with. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Not enough to fix anything, but maybe enough to stop the bleeding. I folded it once, tucked it inside a drawer I no longer used. I didn't write back. Some wounds don't close with closure. They seal from distance, from boundaries. Weeks passed. The air shifted. I started sleeping better. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. One morning, while reorganizing a file case, I found a printed copy of my original venue contract, Pine Grove Hall, September 14th. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the date. It was supposed to be perfect. But maybe perfect was the problem all along. Dean walked in, coffee in hand. "You thinking about what could have been?" he asked. I looked up. "No, I'm thinking about what finally is." He smiled. "You always land on your feet." And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the phrase, because now I knew I hadn't just landed. I'd built the ground myself. 6 months after the wedding, I got the offer. An email from the Legal Advocacy Center for Victims of Fraud. They were building a new division, focused on families destroyed not just by scams, but by silence and loyalty. They didn't want a resume. They wanted someone who had lived through betrayal, stood in the fire, and chose not to become it. I stared at the subject line for a full minute, then I opened it. Then I said yes. My parents sent flowers to my office on day 1. White orchids. The note didn't have a name, but I knew it was her. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice was tired but still careful. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's not enough, but it's real." I let her say it. No rebuttal, just quiet space for something overdue. My father didn't say a word about anything, but when Lucille casually mentioned he'd missed golf to start therapy, I didn't need more. Some apologies don't need an audience. They show up in canceled appointments, in the way someone starts listening more than defending. That was enough for me. After years of shouting into silence, I learned to recognize effort without needing it to be perfect. I sent Aaron a photo from my wedding, me and Dean, barefoot, standing in the sand, wind tearing through my veil, like it wasn't afraid to ruin something pretty. I didn't write a speech, just one line. Not to brag, just to show you I'm still here, and I chose to survive clean. She never replied. Maybe she never will. That message was never really for her. People always think betrayal ends when the damage is done. It doesn't. It lingers. In the way you flinch when someone praises you. In the doubt that creeps in when things go well. In the silence that follows holidays, where your seat at the table was once an afterthought. The hardest part isn't being hurt. It's learning how to keep living without shrinking. For a long time, I thought I had to win to be worthy. I thought forgiveness looked like fixing people who never asked to be healed. I thought peace meant making space for chaos if it wore the right clothes. But now I know, walking away doesn't mean you gave up. Sometimes it means you finally believe you deserve better than waiting to be chosen. To the daughters labeled difficult for telling the truth. To the women whose families only love them when they're quiet. To anyone who ever made themselves small just to keep things peaceful, I see you. You're not too much. You're not broken. You were just raised in a system that taught you silence was survival. But you've outgrown survival. Now it's time to live. This wasn't a revenge story. It was a reclamation of space, of voice, of identity. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones most committed to denying your reality. But you don't owe them your sanity. You don't have to play roles you've outgrown. You don't have to carry guilt that was handed to you like an heirloom. You get to be new. If you stayed with me this far, thank you for listening, for holding space, for witnessing something that so many women live but never name. If this made you think about your own story, I hope you write it. Say it. Scream it if you have to. But don't let it stay buried. You deserve to be the main character in your own life. And from someone who once planned a wedding that wasn't hers, thank you. Thank you for letting me reclaim mine. For watching me stand tall in a dress I chose, beside a man who saw me long before I proved I was worth seeing. Surviving well is the most honest form of rebellion. I didn't just survive my family, I survived myself. And now, finally, I'm free.